Hello there. If there was one reason, if there were to be just one topic, if, for example, somebody told me that I could make this podcast and I was only allowed to talk about one topic and that would be the end of it, it would be a wrap. This would be that topic. I say this because, in truth, this very event, which is quite unfortunate as we will find out when we go on, is to me one of the most important events that has happened in Nigeria's recent past. So much so that I believe it is akin to our Hillsborough disaster, our 9/11. Basically, I do not think that any Nigerian above the age of 10 should continue their development without the privilege or the avenue to learn about this particular incident. It is that important to me and to Nigeria. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Fhtf Rhtr podcast. Forgetting how to forget, remembering how to remember. And today we want to talk about what is popularly referred to as the Ikeja bomb blast of 2002. Ikeja is the capital city of Lagos State. Despite the fact that it is in Lagos, Ikeja is actually not a Yoruba word. Ikeja is uh, an acronym that stands for Ikorodu and Epe Joint Administration. Now, for those of you who know Lagos very well, you would know that Ikorodu and Epe are not exactly side by side. While Ikorodu is on one extreme, Epe is on the other. However, which we'll come to see when we take a look at the map of Lagos State to see how the city is laid out. In some ways, Epe is quite close to Ikorodu. It is, however, separated by one of the two famous lagoons that makes Lagos Lagos. But yes, Ikeja is the capital city of Lagos, and because of that, Ikeja is situated or is situate in a very unique location in the sense that while most places in Lagos are either on one end or bordered by one other place, Ikeja is one of the few places in Lagos that has access to practically everywhere else. And it's understandable. Like I said, it is the capital. So therefore, if you are a traveler or if you are somebody who is conversant with Lagos, should you be in Ikeja, there's almost no part of Lagos that you do not have a direct access to. This is important because the infrastructure in Ikeja follows suit. We have, for example, the Ikeja GRA, which is a, a very serene part of Ikeja. Then we have the industrial part of Ikeja, which has places like 7 Up and Coca-Cola and goes all the way to places like Computer Village, which I'm sure many of you know about. Then we have the Secretariat, where the government house is, where the other government buildings are. And then we have what we can only call, or what we could call then, but not so much now, the satellite towns of Ikeja, because Ikeja is uniquely placed, like I said, in the sense that Ikeja basically borders about six different major parts of Lagos. For example, on one end, Ikeja starts at a place called Berga. Berga is literally the boundary of Lagos. The moment you go past Berga, you are going to Lagos Ibadan Expressway and out of the state. On the other side, Ikeja borders Agege, which takes you towards places like Abulegba. And if you are going to keep going further, then you are going all the way to places like Songo, Ota. And then just to the side, Ikeja borders Akowonjo and Egbeda, which if you follow through goes to places like Ikoton. Then Ikeja borders Oshodi, which takes you down and then goes to places like Apapa. And Ikeja borders Mushin, which is around places like Fadi and Onipan. Coming back down again, Ikeja also has on the other side of it places like Ojota and Ketu, which goes into other government residential areas. Why do I bring all of this up? I bring all of this up because when Lagos State was formed, Ikeja was a place that was thought or was seen as a suitable place to house a military cantonment. We will get to that a little bit later. But now let's talk about the fateful day. On January 27th, 2002, it was a normal Sunday. A lot of people had gone to church, they had come back, they were preparing for Monday, and most of the day had gone. As a matter of fact, it was not until about 6 p.m. that this particular incident started. But for somebody like me, who happened to be in secondary school at the time, which was in Akowonjo, what we could hear was a bang here, a boom there, and then repeat after every 5 seconds or so. We had never heard sounds like that before. We had never been intimated with those kinds of noises in our lives. And obviously, everybody wanted to know what was going on. As it so turns out, an ammunition dump, which is the Ikeja cantonment, started to explode. The official story is that um, there was a fire that spread from one of the nearby markets, and this fire got to the ammunition and got to the explosives, and that triggered them, and then they started to go off. Obviously, this was something that we found out in hindsight. We did not know this at the time. All we knew was that something was happening, and something was happening that nobody could explain. For those people who were closer, there were fires, shrapnel, dusts, and smoke clouds rising as high as anybody could see. So you can imagine people were running left and running right. So the initial reaction, of course, was chaos. You can only imagine being 100 feet away from an actual explosion. If you've been there before where someone set off fireworks, you can imagine how loud that is, or you would remember how loud that is. And then an actual bomb going off, an actual weapon of destruction, military grade. It's not something that there are drills for. Obviously, rumors started to spread. Mind you, this is 2002. So in 2002, not everybody had cell phone, and not everybody could make a call and say, "Oh, be calm, do not move. This is what is going on." No, a lot of what we could hear was word of mouth. People said places were burning. Some other people said that they were armed robbers somewhere else. But obviously, whatever story you heard did not make any sense because the sounds did not sound like what would make you hear and say, "Oh, okay, that sounds like armed robbers are robbing by 6 p.m. on a Sunday evening." Did not really add up. These explosions lasted for about 2 hours, I imagine. And when they happened, a number of events followed. Now, let's come back to where we started from, the fact that there is a cantonment in Ikeja. Mind you, Ikeja is also, I did not mention this before, a densely populated area. There are a number of civilians and military personnel who live in and around the Ikeja environment. If we're going to put this in context, people were going about their lives. They heard one sound, which turned to two sounds, and three, and four, and five, and then they realized that they were in danger. And when they realized that they were in danger, they had to move. Now, there are two concepts I would like to briefly explain here. The concepts are one, running to safety, and two, running away from danger. They may sound similar, but they are quite different. Running to safety is simple. Should you have a problem now, one of the first things you think of is, how do I get home? How do I go to where I know the people that are there and I can ask for help? That is running to safety. If you were driving on an expressway and you found out that something untoward was going on in front of you, and then you see a police station beside you, you could run there, and that's running to safety. Basically, you are going somewhere that you believe you'll be safe. How is that different from running away from danger? Running away from danger is different because it takes away that safety element that we just discussed. Therefore, running away from danger is simply trying to get as far and as fast away from where you are because you do not know what will happen to you if you remain there. These two things are very important because understanding these two concepts would explain one of the reasons that this tragedy is a special one in Nigeria's history. Uh-huh. When the explosion started, the first casualties or the first people who suffered were the people in the immediate surroundings. Of course, when a bomb goes off here, the people in the next house and the people in this house, of course, and the people around here will be hit by shrapnel and debris and dust and fire. Those casualties numbered in the hundreds. The second group of casualties in the Ikeja bomb blast were the ones who were running away from danger. Now, like I said, Ikeja is situated in the middle of Lagos. Somehow on the boundary, but in the middle of Lagos, in the sense that you can access many other places. One of the places that Ikeja can access is a place called Amuwo, OKE hyphen AFA. That was where most of the people lost their lives. And why did this happen? There happened to be, and there happens to be to this day, a waterway there. It's a canal which drains water from many communities and runs quite deep actually, because that same canal goes as far as about 6 kilometers through Lagos. There was just a little problem because of poor environmental practices and a lack of a proper maintenance culture. It turns out that the canal in Okeafa was largely covered, first with refuse, and second by vegetation, mostly lilies. What that means, or what that meant, was that for most people, when they looked upon the canal, what they saw, especially in the hysteria and in their haste, was a plain field that you could run over. That was a terrible mistake. Hundreds and hundreds of people running away from danger ran in the direction of the canal, ran into the body of water, started sinking to the bottom. And in the same hysteria, the people behind them who did not know any better or who were not in their right minds to think, understandably, followed, trampled upon them, and were themselves taken by the water. It is estimated that in the Ikeja bomb blast, about 2,000 Nigerians were killed. Of that 2,000, more than 80% died as a result of, these are unreported anyway, died as a result of drowning and the stampede that happened at Okeafa. So the damage that occurred to the cantonment itself was devastating. You can imagine when bombs happen, tremors go with them, the ground shakes. So the buildings around, not only were they destroyed outwardly, their foundations were forever compromised, and they were basically not just going to be livable any longer. And the damage was plain for everyone to see. Now, if you look closely at the map of Ikeja, you'll see exactly what I'm trying to say. Ikeja is both in the middle and on the outskirts of Lagos. So, like I said, on one part of Ikeja, it leads you straight out of Lagos. But then, by the map that we have, you can tell that Ikeja is just beside Fakwaijai, it is just beside Agege, and then it's beside Alimosho, and then it is beside Oshodi, Isolo, and then it is beside Mushin, and it is beside Shumolu, and then beside Kosofe. It is through Oshodi and Isolo that you go from Ikeja to Amuwo Odofin. And it is in that axis that the Okeafa Canal exists. Like I said, when you are differentiating a barrack from a cantonment, a military barrack is a building or complex designed to house soldiers and other service members, functioning like a dormitory or apartment for military personnel. While a military cantonment is a large permanent military base or station where troops live, train, and work, essentially a dedicated town for the armed forces, often with both military and civilian population. So the entrance to the military cantonment is on Adekunle Faji Way, which goes from Maryland all the way down to Computer Village. If you go across that road, you pass such landmarks as the Sheraton Hotel, for example. The reality of soldiers lashing out to the extent of throwing items at the vice president when he came, the only thing we can say about it is it showed that there was pain. There was a lot of pain that accompanied what happened that day. And whether we like it or not, something has to be said for that. That they were able to lose their composure to the point where they damned the consequences. And you best believe what they did meant that they actually did damn the consequences, as is shown here in our newspaper report. The deaths, of course, and a lot of them were to women and children, as these tragedies often do, because the vulnerable are the ones who get into these problems. They can't run as fast, they can't withstand noises as loud, and they can't take pain as severe. It is just a tragedy all round. It's a tragedy. As we said, covered by refuse and covered by lilies, to the unsuspecting eye, you are basically looking at a field of grass that you can run up or you can run over. But then once that is cleared, and I must state that the Lagos State government has been very careful to make sure that they do not repeat this again. So you would hardly, in fact, I'll use myself. I have not gone past that body of water and seen it covered by anything, not refuse, not vegetation. It has been left clear for people to see that this is not a place that you can tread over, because that was a very big mistake that we made as a people on that day, that people did not know that this was a death trap. The Okeafa Memorial Arcade, in honor of the victims of the 2002 Ikeja bomb blast. A most welcome gesture. Most welcome gesture. There are many questions to ask at this point. Um, First of all, um, when a tragedy like that happened, who was tasked with responding? Well, in this case, everybody had to respond. The citizens of Lagos had to respond. The Lagos state government had to respond. The federal government had to respond. And indeed, the international community had to respond. And fair play to every single member I just called, because they all did respond. We had, for example, the National Emergency Management Authority, NEMA, who came in swiftly, working with federal government and with the state government in order to create temporary housing for some of the people who were displaced. And in the immediate aftermath of the bombing, two camps were created. One of them was created in the police barracks in Ikeja, and another was created in the Abati barracks in Yaba. And both of them served their purpose. Um, the international community was also very helpful. UNICEF came to the aid of Nigerians, the Red Cross, OCHA, ONDA, and different organizations in France and Spain and Algeria, amongst others, contributed money, sent aid, sent intelligence, sent help. But there's one particular response that is curious, which is the Nigerian army. First of all, before I even delve into this, I should state one thing. The Nigerian army is designed in a particular way. The function of the army is to defend Nigeria from external threats. That is understood. What that the Nigerian army is designed in a particular way. The army's number one job is to defend Nigeria from external threat. What that means is that ordinarily the Nigerian army is not really supposed to be intertwined or intermingling with civilian population. For those of us who have experience with members of foreign military, they try as much as possible to limit the interactions that members in service have with average citizens for various reasons. In Nigeria, not so much. In Nigeria, we have a closer relationship with members of our armed forces. We see them on the roads, we live in their barracks, and we tend to understand their language to a certain extent. I'm saying all this to say that one of the things that we know the military for, or we think we know the military for, is some sort of blind followership. Like some people will say, soldier go, soldier come, which is a way of saying whatever a soldier is told to do, he does. And if he's not told to do anything, he does not think for himself. But that is not exactly what happened. Therefore, in describing the response of the military, I would have to divide it into two. I will talk about the military as an institution, and then I will talk about personal members of the military. For the personal members of the military, they felt kind of betrayed. It was eventually revealed by the by the Olusegun Obasanjo-led government that there had been plans to move the ammunition from the Ikeja cantonment about a year before that incident occurred. These plans, for some reason, was never carried out. But one thing we can know is that there was never an order given to move those things, because if an order was given, they would have been moved. So for whatever it was, whether it was red tape, whether it was technical, some of the members of the military who, let's not forget, lived in the cantonment and so were the primary victims, because they were caught in the fires, they were caught in the debris, and they lost lives of their children, of their spouses, of their family members. They felt as though the government had betrayed them. This led to, for example, when the Vice President Atiku Abubakar came to visit and pay his condolences, he was shouted down by members of the military. This is a very uncharacteristic thing for members of the military to do, because the president is the commander of the armed forces and the vice president is his second in command. So that will be as good as soldiers in a parade ground refusing an order from their superior. But that was how much pain and that was how much anger they felt. But then, as an institution, the Nigerian army, of course, they went to work. They understood that two things were important. They had to contain, and obviously, they had to go around investigating. So, they did the containment part. They made sure that they set a perimeter around the place. They made sure that they controlled traffic and they made sure that people understood what had just happened. They went on an information campaign, gave as much information as they could to the authorities as they came through and made sure that everything was all right. But this now comes to the second. And I do not know if you remember, I said that there were three classes of casualties. The first, who were the immediate casualties. The second, who were the people who died in the stampede and running away. The third, it's a small number, but one life lost is one too many. Were people who were lost to the remaining explosive devices that were flung every which way. So there were stories, pockets of stories, of course, but there were stories of children playing in the streets and picking up landmines that had not been found during the cleanup exercise. And the military did, I'm not a spokesperson for them, but they did their best. They tried their best to go everywhere, searching with their equipment to make sure that they did not leave any stone unturned. But alas, some stones were left unturned, and some people were lost in the weeks after to explosions here and there. There is a what if scenario, and I will make this a little personal. When this happened, I was in secondary school, and I knew a lot of friends. Now, back to the Ikeja cantonment. The Ikeja cantonment, and I think I should make this distinction first. For most Nigerians, we know about barracks. We know people who live in barracks, and we know people who live in cantonments. But there's a difference between a barrack and a cantonment. While a barrack is just the living quarters, a cantonment is a permanent installation of living quarters and more. So very likely you find barracks in cantonments. The keyword or the message I'm trying to bring out here is a cantonment is mostly very large, and the Ikeja cantonment is large. Now, why I'm bringing this is in the Ikeja cantonment, there are three schools. There's a command children's school, there's an army children's school, and then there's a command secondary school. It just so turns out that none of those schools were boarding schools, and this incident occurred on Sunday. Therefore, there were no students around. Because even though it happened at about 6 p.m., if it happened on a weekday, there would be, first of all, a lot of traffic from people who were returning from work, and there would be students who were just finishing their lessons and leaving, and they would have been caught in that problem. A lot of the destruction that occurred was to the schools and to the living quarters of some of these people. And you tend to think and say, what if this actually did happen on a Monday or a Tuesday or a Wednesday or a Thursday? Basically, what if it happened on a day when children has just sang their national anthem and gone into classes? What if it happened early in the morning by 8 a.m.? What if it happened at noon by 12? There are so many what ifs that the one conclusion you can come to is that those things, and by those things I mean the explosions, should never have been there in the first place. This is further aggravated by the fact that when this when the explosions were over, the international community offered to help Nigeria. And the major help that they gave Nigeria was in establishing first that the cleanup of the explosives, there's a technical name that they were given, which is UXOs. It is code for unexploded ordnance. It does have a definition. I think I should provide the definition. A UXO is an unexploded ordnance, and it refers to contamination on land, water, or areas containing dormant but still live military explosives. The international community made the Nigerian army know that they were not technically equipped to handle this problem. Think of what the implication of this is. It means that there is a scenario, another what if, where we would have been so stranded that without external help, we may never have gotten to the root of the problem and solved it once and for all. That is a bit embarrassing if you think about it, but it is also very telling. And I think is one of the big lessons and takeaways from this particular ordeal, which is the cantonment is not supposed to be in the middle of civilians. Right now, right now, the same Ikeja cantonment is where it used to be. The front gate of it is on one of the most used roads in Lagos, Mobolaji Bankantoni Way. It is the road that goes from Maryland to Computer Village. It has a couple of small unused gates on Adekunle Faji Way, but the back gate opens up to Agege Motor Expressway, which is in Oshodi. Another place which is probably one of the most or one of the busiest commuter spots in Lagos. In fact, if you've never been to Lagos before, one of the ways somebody can tell you about Lagos is by saying Oshodi. It is known for being rowdy, it's known for being overpopulated, it is known for being Lagos. And there is a military cantonment right in the middle of this. There are houses to the left, there are houses to the right, there are houses across the street, there are markets around this installment. And that lesson we have not learned. And I understand, obviously, when Lagos was being drawn up and when the cantonment was put there, Lagos was not this populated and the civilian spread was not in this manner. But times change. And if times change, you change with this time. If things like this happen, you respond to these happenings. I'm sorry, but that response has not come. Nigeria was designed with a few flaws. When I flaws, I mean errors. One of these errors is the Nigerian military. What do I mean by this? The Nigerian military, like we established in the beginning, is meant to fight external aggression. However, the Nigerian military was designed as a governance tool in Nigeria, which was never supposed to be the case, or which is not supposed to be the case. For this reason, we have several installations and several machinations of the military embedded in civilian enclaves. In Yaba, Lagos, for example, one of the places where the temporary IDP camps was made, there are three barracks, military barracks. There's An barracks, there's Mada barracks, there's Mayon barracks. And then, of course, there's the Abati barracks, which is not as large as those other ones, in the same city. Now, if you were to add police barracks with them, there are about eight. And in and around all of these barracks are civilians working and living their lives like nothing is wrong. It doesn't take a genius to tell that this is not supposed to be the case. It doesn't take too much thinking to understand that this interaction is not particularly healthy for the average Nigerian. But that is the reality that we live in. That is what we face. Depending on where you come from in Nigeria, you know, just like I do, you know a barrack near you. You know a cantonment in your state. Not one, not two, several. And whether we want to admit it or not, many of them may just have this kind of problem waiting to happen. If, and this is with the fervent prayer that it never does, but if it does happen, who do we blame? Where do we point the fingers? What names do we call? Because one thing we can say about tragedy is that when tragedy strikes, it has already struck. The same way that on the 27th of January 2002, tragedy struck in Lagos State and thousands of people died because explosives that were kept at the Ikeja cantonment went off and could not be contained on time. If you wish to pay your respects to the people who died, Okeafa, where the canal is, the Lagos State government, in conjunction with other authorities, erected a memorial for the fallen. It's a beautiful place that shows that we care about the loss of Nigerian lives. But I believe that we should care more than remembering. We should care enough not to forget as well. Thank you.